Greetings everyone, this is Keenan once again for our Rhino workshop series. In this module, we will cover the move command to precisely move objects within Rhino. We'll also cover the two selection window methods to precisely select objects within Rhino. And we will also cover the smart track feature in Rhino that allows us to precisely create new geometry and move existing geometry based on other geometry within Rhino. These are all foundational modeling skills that are very helpful for you throughout your modeling careers. And so let's dive right into it. We're going to look at the move command a little bit more in depth, and go ahead and open up your chapter 3 objects. What is Rhino file? It'll just be a little handy to have some of these objects ready. Alrighty, so we use the move command to sort of move generally. But we're going to be a little bit more specific now. So this is going to be using the move command in conjunction with your O snaps to be really precise about where and how you are moving an object. So let's, for example, if we wanted to move this cube, the corner to the point of our cone, we would use the move command thusly. So go ahead and type in move. And again, you could already start with the move, the object you want to move, and then type in move. It just saves that one step. So I'll select this bottom corner as the point to move from. And if your O snaps are not showing up, just make sure that they are enabled and that they are not all disabled, right? So make sure they're enabled. Bottom corner. And now I can move that precisely to the endpoint of that cone. No big deal. So instead, perhaps I want to move the center of this cube. Well, we've been using the cube a lot. Let's use this sphere, all right? So let's say we wanted to move the center of this sphere. Let's go ahead and move this cube out of the way. It's had too much screen time. All right, so we're going to move the center of our sphere to, or rather the quadrant, the top part, or the bottom quadrant to the center of this top of that point. We'll use the move command again. Now just keep in mind, what that O snap is snapping to will be highlighted on your cursor, right? So in this case, it's the endpoint. And if I click that, just be my starting point, and then my move point, it's an end to end, no problem. So I could do that all day. However, say I wanted to move that same quadrant of my, or that end point of my sphere to the center of my cylinder. In this case, I would toggle center on, the O snap center. Now this can be a little unwieldy because it likes to be the center of attention, and it can be a little bit annoying. But in this case, it's going to be super helpful. So with my sphere selected, I'll type in move. Also, I mentioned this in class, but if you ever want to bring up the previous command, you don't have to type it in every time. If you wanted to just reactivate the last used command, you can press enter, spacebar, or right click, and it will just reactivate the last used command. So since the last one I did was move, I'm going to just say enter, so bring up the move command again. The move from point will be this endpoint of my sphere. And now, since I want the center of this cylinder, I'm going to hover towards the edge, actually, of my cylinder, and you'll see it snaps to the center. So this is a little counterintuitive because you'd think you would, oh god, and it's getting all weird. You would think it would want to snap to the actual midpoint, but if I hover my cursor over the midpoint, nothing happens. The center O snap works by defining first the outer edge of either a circle, a hexagon, polygon, some other type of, it could even be a rectangle, but it works by first defining that outer boundary, and then it says, okay, the outer boundary has a center of this point, And that's how the O-snap works. So it can be a little weird, especially if you're trying to get the center point and it's like snapping to this end point. You see this end, or in this case, it's end, tangent, intersection. Depends exactly where you're hovering, right? Sometimes you can have these multiple ones. So if you're just after the center, try sort of moving your cursor around the outer edge of that circle. And then as soon as you get center, go ahead and click left click to enable that. And now my start point has been snapped to the center of my cylinder. No problem. Just to demonstrate that center also works with non-circular objects. Move again. I could have also pressed enter. So if I, and it actually doesn't on this case. So that's interesting. Okay, so I had expected it to snap to the center of this, but that's because this was an extrusion object and therefore doesn't have the same properties as a rectangle's center point. So for instance, just to demonstrate the difference of this, I'm going to type in rectangle. That's just going to give me a 2D rectangle command. I'm just going to draw this flat on the construction plane of the top. And I could either, enter a specific dimension, or one cool thing, if you're just wanting a square with the rectangle command, you can hold shift and it'll constrain both of those lengths so that it's a square. And then I'm just going to click kind of arbitrarily. And then just following good layer management, I'm going to move this over to my curves layer. And because I turned that off earlier, I'm going to turn it back on. Okay, great. Okay, so just to demo this center snap real quick. So select this sphere. I'm going to type in move. I'm going to select my same endpoint of that sphere. And now we should be able to see in the rectangle, a rectangle technically has a center that is defined with that. It's a little different with 3D extrusion objects. So they don't have a center snap in the same way that a rectangle does. So that's just a way that you can precisely move things around using your O-snaps, selectively toggling center on and off, because it can be a bit unwieldy. And then, yeah, being really specific about what O-snap you're moving towards. Again, for example, say I wanted to move that same endpoint to the middle point of my cube. You can find that midpoint by kind of moving your cursor along, and it should snap to the midpoint. So there you go. So yeah, just using that O-snap to be very precise and specific. Alrighty, so now there are a few other things we can do with the move command. Up until now, we've just been using snaps to define our start and end position, but you can also type in a specific distance. So say we wanted to move our cylinder 50 units from a starting place. So we're in inches, so like normal, just going to define my starting point. This will be the end right there. And then I'm going to bring over this cylinder just in this x-axis a little bit. And what did we say? 50 units, I think. So I'm typing in 50, and then I'll press enter. Now, this is constrained the movement from 50 units away from that starting position. And I haven't clicked left click yet, so I haven't completed the command. So it's asking me, okay, now you've said how far you want to move it. Now, what direction do you want to move it, right? Point to move to. And because I have ortho on, it's snapping to those 4 orthogonal directions. But if I wanted to disable that, holding shift will do that. And now you'll see I can do a distance of 50 in a sort of radius, right? It's like any point 50 points away from that starting point is where I can put it. And so this is what's called a distance constraint. So you can combine that with either your ortho constraint, so that you're just moving cardinally, or disable it by holding shift temporarily and then clicking and saying, okay, that's where I want to move it to. So super handy. So yeah, again, that's another way to precisely move an object. You can also this can also be done by typing in move, and then the base point technically can be anywhere on your grid. Like I could click way over here in space, and because my start point is sort of defined by that first place I click, then it could be anywhere. So this is cool because now I want to move, I can do relative movements. I could move this relative to another object's spacing. So for instance, let me bring this cylinder over here. Maybe I have some project that needs, a specific sort of increment moved, defined by another object. I know this is kind of esoteric, but hopefully this will make sense. So say I move this endpoint to the starting position of this curve. I'm just going to zoom in so it's a little clearer, right? So we've got that endpoint right at the point of that arc. I could, these were not drawn evenly. You can kind of see these two arcs are a little farther apart than these two. So say like I needed to move this object a certain distance based on the distances between two other objects. I can type in move, and then my start and end point can be anywhere, right? So if it's just the distance and that I care about between 2 points, and perhaps the angle, because this would also depend on the angle that this is moved. I could choose my start point here and then my end point here, and that would move it that specific distance. It could perhaps also be on this point, but in this case, it's at an angle, right? So I'm able to move it a certain distance on that angle. So that could be useful depending on what you're doing. I will often move things relative to other objects. It might be a little clearer if I use this. I'm gonna move this down since it's floating in free space. I'm just gonna use my O snap to snap it down to this plane, and then I'm gonna delete our sphere. We don't need that. I'm just gonna create another copy, and then I'm just gonna scale this so we can kind of tell these two things apart. I'm gonna move this again so that these things are in line. And so perhaps I needed to move this smaller object half the distance of this larger object, right? So I could reference that using the move command. Start point could be the midpoint here. That's like half the distance, right? And then my endpoint could be here. So then, you don't have to spend all this time figuring out, okay, how far is that, from the endpoint to the midpoint, and how much do I need to move that? You can use that to move relative to other objects. So that's another handy way to use the move command. Okay, great. So I think earlier we had this cube floating out kind of 3D space, kind of randomly. I used the object snap just to snap it down to something that I knew was already at the construction plane, at 0. But you might not always have something like that handy. So there's another way to move an object so that it's snapped to be completely at the construction plane, which is 0 in the z-axis. So to do that, we'll use the move command, and you want to select the point to move from as the lowest point that you want to be snapping to 0. So in this case, we'll choose this. Excuse me. Let me back up. Okay, I'm going to select the object I want to move. Type in move. All right, before I do any selection of any kind, you'll see up here in the parentheses, got a few options, normal and vertical. Maybe I want to keep the relative XY position here, and I just want to drop it straight down. So I'll use the vertical constraint, the vertical option. Now, it will still ask me like the point to move from. So I'll still pick the point that I want to be at the lowest point. So I'll pick this lower corner. And now when I move it, it's limiting my movement to the z-axis. So this is great. So now I could either, if if I had a 2D line that I'd drawn and I knew that was projected to the z-axis construction plane, I could reference that. If I didn't have that, I could instead type in 0 and then enter. And that will place this object on the z-axis 0 of my current construction plane. And in this case, my current construction plane being the world construction plane, 0z is going to be flat to that surface, that construction plane, right? So move vertical is very handy. You can also, any of these options, you can also select by using the letter that's underscored. So in this case, it's V. It's most of the time the first letter of that sub option, but often there are there's so many multiple sub options that they have to use the second or the third letter. So just keep an eye out for that. So instead of clicking vertical, I could type the letter V and then press enter. And it's just another fast way. Do whatever is comfortable. And then, yeah, now it's constraining that in the Z height. Instead of 0, maybe I want to go up 50 units exactly, 50 inches. I can type in 50 and then enter. Oh, excuse me. There we go. So there you go. Move is a really powerful tool, and yeah, I use it so much. Pretty much any time I'm modeling, I will be wanting to move accurately to a specific spot on the model, unless I'm really being freeform with it. But pretty much always I'm wanting to snap to an existing piece of geometry or move relative to that geometry a certain amount. And using move is super handy for doing that. And you can also be precise with the gumball. Once you have your item placed, your object placed, maybe, you have this placed here. Like we did earlier, we know that this distance is the midpoint. So from there, you could say, okay, well, I want to go 5 more units, because then that'll give me a total of, whatever my increment is. Once you have an established baseline, you can use the gumball relative, to its current position. But moving things precisely with the move command is super helpful. And there are some different options for you. Okay, great. So I want to talk a lot, maybe a lot, about selection windows. We sort of were talking about that earlier when I was saying click and drag from right to left and drag a big window to select objects. But let's make this a little bit clearer. I'm going to go up into perspective, double click, and make top view my full screen, just because I find this is a little bit easier to see. And then I will toggle my current layer to be curves, and I'm just going to draw a series of lines and curves and rectangles just to have some variety here. So, and preferably some different sizes here. And then let's get some rectangles in here while we're at it. This is just going to help serve as some example things. I'll use the circle tool to create some circles. This is a good chance to show you the polygon tool. So polygon is great for creating many numbered sides, polygon. So the default, I think, is 6. So do hexagon here. Okay, so we've got some objects. Alrighty, so this is going to be a little demo on the selection window. What do I mean by that? So if you left click and drag from right to left, that's what this window is here. This is a selection window. Going from right to left gives you this dashed line around the window. And that dashed line means that this is a crossing selection window, which means that anything that dashed line touches will be added to your selection when you release your left mouse button. So I'm going to go ahead and I've got some of these lines just barely selected. See these horizontal lines, the smallest one just barely selected, but it is crossing it. So I'm going to release my left mouse button. Everything that dashed line touches will be added to my selection. All right, that is in contrast to the closed selection window, which is generated from going left to right with your mouse button, or with your mouse clicking with the left button. So if I do the same thing, like so for example, this hexagon, my window boundary is crossing it, but this solid line, because I'm going from left to right this time, it's not going to select that hexagon because it's not fully enclosed within my window. So if I release, and you'll see it didn't get those other lines as well. This is just sort of how Rhino works. This is how AutoCAD works as well. Crossing versus crossing being this dashed one, right? Anything that crosses that line will be included, versus closed, anything completely within the window is added. Anything that's not completely within is not included. Be aware of what direction you're dragging, and it doesn't have to be always top down. You can go from bottom up. It's just the direction, right? So from left to right, either from bottom to top or from top to bottom, it's the same thing. It's just the direction, right? Versus from right to left, same kind of thing with the crossing window. So experiment with that. Draw some example lines like this. See how you can select them. This can be handy if you're strategic. Say like I had some very small shapes, right? I'm going to scale these down uniformly with the gumball holding shift. And maybe I had like a bunch of these. I'm just going to make a copy of this, right? Okay, so maybe I needed to select all of these lines here, and perhaps like they're kind of surrounded by some other geometry, and it's kind of in a cluster here. Using the crossing selection window is going to add a lot of things that I don't want to select to my current selection. So you can be pretty strategic. You can start your you can start your closed selection window pretty selectively, and then just get what you need. Same with top to bottom, maybe even a sub-selection of that small group, right? Maybe I just want a few of those. So yeah, that is the selection window. Again, crossing is the dashed line from right to left. Doesn't matter if it's top to bottom or bottom to top. Crossing is from left to right. And those are the two main selection windows. Go ahead and experiment with that. And if you're getting frustrated, like, oh, why can't I select this thing? It's probably because you're using the left to right one, and it's just not fully enclosing whatever you're trying to select. Okay. Vice versa, if you're like, oh, I'm selecting everything, like maybe you're using the crossing selection window. So play around with that. Just kind of keep that in mind. It's one of those things that took me a while to kind of figure out how to use, and then once I started using it, I never looked back. So, alrighty, selection window. Now, there are a few things that I want to chat about in terms of like geometry, 2D geometry specifically. Okay. First of all, if you've noticed that you've moved this, up and down a lot, maybe you've sort of accidentally moved some stuff around in the Z-axis. Maybe it's even below there. Or if you've drawn something and you thought it was like on a construction plane, but it turns out to be all kind of wish-washy. Here, I'll draw something in top view real quick just to demo that. So for instance, if I drew a polyline and I thought I was all on the flat piece of this, but it turns out maybe I wasn't. Maybe I'd drawn something kind of like this. In the top view, it's going to look flat, but then if I go into perspective, oh, there's no way this is flat, right? It's got all kinds of stuff going on here. There is a quick way to create a flat version of these lines. I'll bring this one over here just so we can, well, no, sorry, I'll leave that there. It's a good example. We'll start with this crazy one here, and we'll go ahead and make perspective full screen. This is going to be using the ProjectToCPlane command. So that's going to be ProjectToCPlane. ProjectToCPlane, project to construction plane. And this will project this 2D line flat to the current construction plane. And now because top and perspective share the same construction plane, it's super handy if you've created a plan view of something, drawn in plan that looks fine in top view, and then you come into perspective and you're like, oh no, this is totally wrong. There's a way to salvage this so you don't have to redraw everything. So, all right, so project to C-plane. Select objects to project. I'll select this object, my crazy line. I'm going to press enter. Now it will ask, do you want to delete the input object? And in this case, I do, because the original line is all wonky and I just don't want to mess with it. So I will say yes, or you can type in Y for yes, that underscore Y. So yes, and then enter. And now this has been flattened to the current construction plane. And it's all nice, it's all fine and dandy. And you'll notice too, like if I just undo that real quick, this was before we go to our properties, the type, it's an open curve, which is not ideal if we wanted to extrude this. So just redoing my project to C-plane, by projecting that, it has closed that curve because the start and end point were on the same XY coordinate, but they were just separated in the Z direction, right? So project to C-plane can fix those open curves if those start and end points are just separated by a Z height difference. So that's a handy command to know. Project to C-plane. If you have some open curves, it might be able to close them if those start and end points are sharing the XY coordinate and just having a Z coordinate that's different. And you can do the same thing with these floating lines here, right? So we've got kind of these clusters. Maybe this is even worse, So I'm going to select, and this time I'm using my closed selection window to get that from left to right. And then to select multiple objects to add to this selection, I'm going to hold Shift. And then you can either, do a selection window or just individually click on that with your mouse. And then I've added all of these lines to my selection. Now I'm just going to use the project to C-plane command. Delete input objects. Yes. Enter. And there you go. It's flattened those out just all fine. Coplanar. Super handy. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the project to C-plane uses the current viewport construction plane. If you have activated that command in a different construction plane other than top or perspective, it will project that line on that construction plane. For example, I'm just going to turn on shaded mode here for all my viewports. If we had another, crazy kind of line here going on, and maybe this is really wild. Maybe we've gone crazy and we've done some pretty insane line here. And it's like, okay, that's maybe I've snapped to other reference points that I know, I want this line to go to, but it's all wonky in this top perspective. And actually, I think I may have undone. Here, let me do that again. I think I might have had a start and stop point that were overlapping. So just gonna redo this without going maybe as crazy. So that's my start point, right? So I'm just gonna go back there. Okay. Okay, so I still have this very wild looking line, right? It's going up and down and it's doing all sorts of stuff. You got to be careful with project to C-plane. If you have that project to C-plane command and you use, for example, the right view, that will project that line to the construction plane of the right view. And in this case, that's going to be that y-axis plane, if you can imagine that invisible plane in all directions. So just to demo that, with right view active, I'll do project to C-plane. Delete input, yes. And you'll see now it has been projected flat in the right perspective. And you'll notice that is on the y-axis, as if that was its own construction plane. So you just got to be careful what viewport you have active during that ProjectToCPlane command will determine what C-plane your line work is projected onto. So just FYI, fair warning. Okay, I'm delete that for now. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to top view, and we'll do a little demo here using what is called Rhino's Smart Track feature. To sort of show this, I'm actually going to grab this little cluster of rectangles and squares. And if you don't have any and you're following along, go ahead and just draw like 3 or 4. And I'm just going to scale these up so that it's a little easier to see. All right. So, and then, gosh, I'm going to change this layer, even though it is on the right layer, just for being able to demo this a little easier. I'm just going to change it to the box layer so it's a different color. Okay, cool. And then we're just going to zoom in here. Okay, my current layer is still the curves layer. There's still the red layer. Okay, so the Smart Track feature is a feature that creates these little guidelines for your cursor to help you snap to places a little more easily. So for instance, say I wanted to draw a polyline that sort of references, let's say it references, I'm just going to delete some of these, we don't need all these 3 objects. Say I wanted to draw a line that goes down this way a certain distance, and then over to this right-hand side in line with this middle point here. Now I could just do the polyline command and create my start point like normal, click that, and then come down sort of an arbitrary distance and then come over. You know, I could try to line up. You see my grid lines, like I could try to line those up. It'd be kind of close, and then click. And then maybe this line needs to come all the way here and be in line with this object. And I could line those grid lines up and, you know, I could get it close. But then when I come to it, it's not going to be exact, right? Just by eye, it's not going to be exact. So I'm going to escape out of that command. Using Smart Track can help you immensely when you're trying to be precise with these types of snappings. So polyline command again, I'm going to press enter to bring up my last used command. Now I'm going to start like normal. I'm just going to go down a certain distance and then over. Now, without clicking on this next point, I'm going to hover my cursor at this corner, and you'll see that this little gray node sort of activates. And then if I drop that down, I've got this guideline, and it gives me some information. Gives me a distance and some angles. I usually don't even worry about those. I just kind of want this guideline. And that's just basically a parallel line that I can use to sort of snap. And then I can bring that down level, and it should give me a perpendicular and intersection O-snap if I've got my O-snaps turned on right. So this is a great way. This is using Smart Track. Getting that first node can be tricky sometimes. It works by first hovering over, and then you'll see that little gray part, gray point sort of enable. If you happen to move your mouse slightly off of it and back on, it will disable it. So it's sort of like a hover on, enable, hover on, disable. It just toggles it back and forth. So I'll try to demo. See, hover on, hover off. And it's just kind of as simple as that. If you're having a hard time getting that Smart Track node to show up, you can press the Control or Command key on a point that you want to create your own Smart Track node. This can be a bit unwieldy, but I'll just demo it like out in space here. So there's nothing I currently right in this little area have a Smart Track node. But if I tap the Control key, not holding it, just tapping Control or Command if you're on a Mac, Control, then you'll see I've got a custom little node point, and it's allowing me to have the same kind of line. I can add as many of these as I want. Now just be careful, because it can be really annoying if you have a bunch of these on all at once. If you want to reset these, just double tap the command or control key, and then it gets rid of them all. So these are just temporary little guide snaps, the Smart Track feature. So they're not actually lines that are created. They're just temporary guidelines that are active during a line command, during move, during pretty much anything that references an O snap is usually when you can create one of these Smart Track features. The copy command is also one. So anyway, so we've got our polyline still active. So I'm going to get my Smart Track node. It's got the little gray point. Going to drop it down. Going to get my perpendicular O snap. So there we go. I'm going to left click that point. Now I know that it's exactly in line with that reference point. Pretty handy. So I don't know, maybe I'm making like a little wall around, some buildings, for instance. I don't know exactly what I'm making, but this would be, in line with that little rectangle in the center. Now the next line I want, maybe this wall is in line with this edge of this rectangle. So same thing, right? Hover over to get the gray, bring over my guideline, and now I've got that perpendicular O snap. And then I'm going to click. And then if that is where I'm trying to end up, I can totally do that. If not, maybe it's actually the midpoint of this rectangle. And furthermore, perhaps it's a combination of two things. Maybe it's the midpoint of this shape and the corner of this shape. So see how I hovered over both of those areas, and I've got two control points, or two like Smart Track points. If I kind of bring back my cursor and hover over, hover over that, I should be able to. This is where Smart Track can get a little scary. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to reset. So here's a good example. Reset, double tap, control. I'm actually gonna need to use one more type of this Smart Track feature. So say I want this to be at that angle, right? Going to the midpoint. I'm going to lock that angle in place with my node gray. I'm gonna press tab, the tab key. Just press it, don't hold it, just tap it. Now you'll see this line is turned to solid white, and it's locked that in. This is what's called the tab constraint. So you can find a Smart Track node, snap to whatever that node is, and then press tab, and it will lock it in this constraint. So now maybe I need it to be referencing this point of this building. So now I can use that Smart Track option to snap to that corner, and that's defined that length of that segment of my polyline on a line that is referencing the midpoint here and this corner. And so say maybe that's the corner I want to join to. So there, I can click that and then press enter. So experiment with that using polyline. You can quickly find these little reference points and create some pretty accurate lines, movement types, pressing the tab key, right? Maybe it's this midpoint I want to reference, and then I want to go over to this point, right? I hope this is showing you how powerful this tool can be. It's very, very useful for creating precise geometry that references other nodes in geometry. So use the tab constraint to create those custom points. Again, that tab constraint can be created kind of wherever you start. So this is polyline again, just starting a first point. Maybe I need to like snap to this point, get that gray Smart Track feature, press tab, lock it in place. And then I could extend that and maybe get this corner here. And maybe my line needs to stop at that point right there. So I bring it over to the intersection, click, and then press enter to finish. So there's a way to really precisely create basic geometry. It's just all using polyline, but it's able to reference those precisely and accurately. All right, so those are a few things about Move, ProjectToCPlane, selection windows, Smart Track. And then just to show you that you can use this Smart Track feature in a move command too. Let's type in move and move this little cube around. All right, so say I wanted to move this in line with this sort of angled line here. I'm going to snap so I get that gray node at the very end. I'm going to press tab to lock that in place. And now I'm moving this corner in line with this. So I could go on as long as I want, right? It's always going to be in line with that. Or I could come this way and maybe I need an intersection at this point, but on a line that's projected to that. So you can use that with move as well. Another handy one is the copy command, right? I don't think we've used copy before, but let's go ahead and do it. Let's type in copy with the object we want to say we're copying. Point to copy from. So this is very similar to our move, except this is our base copy point. And then we'll just use this tab constraint in the same way. So I'm going to hover over, and in this case, I'm not totally getting that gray Smart Track node, but I can add a custom one by pressing the Control or Command key, and there I've got one. So now I'm referencing this line here. I probably wasn't getting it because it's already on an orthogonal constraint. So, but yeah, so that's another way you can get that, and you can press tab if you really wanted to. Maybe instead you wanted to snap and copy it at a diagonal, right? So I'm going to copy from this point, I'm going to hover to my opposite angle. Again, press the tab once I have that point as a reference. And now I could create a series, and it's kind of annoying. Each time you copy a line, it resets that tab constraint. But at least it gives you an option to be able to be in line. So maybe it's like, maybe I don't need to snap exactly to that, but it still needs to be in line. So that way you can create copies of an object or move an object in a very precise way that's referencing those Smart Track features. So yeah, play around with it. Hopefully that helps with your precision modeling. Happy modeling.